This is Listen and Be Heard Radio. My name is Tony Robles, and you are entering the audio garden. And well, today we have a very special guest. But before we talk to him, I just want to say, if you're listening for the first time, please subscribe to our channel, listenandbeheard.net. And if you're checking us out on YouTube, our YouTube channel, please subscribe to it so you can get our latest interviews and updates as they come. I've always been drawn to stories that were, I guess you can describe, realist or of the realism genre. And it hasn't been until fairly recently that I've gotten into something called speculative fiction, which I kind of like to call quirky fiction, because a lot of speculative fiction is quirky. And I think to myself, well, I'm reading these things and I'm thinking, well, let's back up. You have a story about a talking vase? And I'm like, wow, all these possibilities that happen. Our next author who's been so gracious to be with us today is Kenneth Yu. Last name is spelled Y-U. He's an award-winning author from the Philippines whose short story fiction has seen publication in his home country as well as overseas in the US, Canada, Malaysia, and Taiwan. His work has been lauded and recognized by renowned speculative fiction editor Ellen Datlow, as well as best-selling author Neil Gaiman and popular fiction podcaster LeVar Burton. In the 2010s, he was a major contributor to the growth and current popularity of genre fiction produced by Filipino writers. He was a judge at the 41st Philippine National Book Awards and is a staunch reading advocate and has ceaselessly pushed literacy to Filipino youth. He was born and raised and currently resides in Metro Manila. Kenneth Yu, thank you for being on our program. It's morning where I'm at, and it's nighttime where you're at, right?
That's right. Thank you so much, Tony, for having me. It is my honor and that you invited me, and I'm really glad to be here. Yes, it's 11 here, but that's fine. Writers are night owls in general, and that's true for me.
I want to congratulate you on your two books, Mouths to Speak, Voices to Sing, which was published in 2024 by Penguin Random House, Southeast Asia, and your latest, The Greatest Fight of Sunny Granada and Other Stories, which was published about a year ago by Anvil Publications in Mandaluyong. I think they're in Mandaluyong City in the Philippines. In your acknowledgments to that book, you cite that your parents were a big influence on you in their love and appreciation for literature. Yet there seems to be an idea that the Philippines and or Filipinos don't appreciate literature or literature that is homegrown. Can you speak to that? Because there's been articles recently about this. There's been a subject of debate.
That's a good observation, Tony. You're very observant by bringing that out. Yeah, there have been news reports that the functional literacy rate of the Philippines is quite low. I forgot the percentage, but it's abysmally low, and that's quite bothersome because, as you know, functional literacy means something as simple as understanding instruction manuals, understanding road signs, understanding menus. Those are basic, and we have a difficulty with that. Now, when you mentioned, on the other hand, about the lack among those who are literate, among those who are reading, that they skew outside the Philippines, that too has been observed by some. However, I am happy to say that there is a growing interest and push for works developed by Filipinos. Reading groups have popped up everywhere, especially among the youngsters, not just the millennials, the Gen Zs, and they have a strong influence on the Gen Alphas. And I'm so happy to see that this influence is extending towards works produced by Asians, specifically Filipinos. There is a group called Akdang Pinoy, which means Works of Filipinos, and they have been as passionate about it as I have when I was younger. They've got the energy of youth that I seem to have lost. But they've been pushing and promoting books written by Filipinos left, right, and center. They've been reviewing them, they've been talking about them, and otherwise setting a good example to the younger people to just pick up a book and read, especially those by their countrymen. It's quite a movement, something that I had not seen when I was about 10, 15, 20 years ago. I did not see it as much, but thanks to them, I believe there is a push for that. So there is hope, though functional literacy is still a challenge in general, because that's a more general problem. The groups like Akdang Pinoy, and they're not alone, have been pushing Filipino works everywhere, and I'm really glad to see that. That is a good sign.
Yes, that is particularly with the young people. Yeah, I cite an article that recently came out in, I think it was the Philippine Star by Karina Gaskill,
Mm.
and the article is called "There's No Market for Filipino Literature." So there's no market for Filipino literature is a lie. Here's why. So she kind of gets into both sides of that
Mhm.
story. I wanted to ask you too, you have kind of an interesting background. As I read a little bit about you in your bio, the Filipinos, we're known as Pinoys or Pinays, right? But I think you were being described as a Chinoy. So if you can maybe talk about that, you're of Chinese ancestry, but you were born and raised in the Philippines, right?
That's right. I was born and raised in the Philippines. I identify, of course, as a Filipino citizen. My passport is
Hmm.
Filipino. But yes, I have a Chinoy background. My parents came from China. Of course, they were refugees. They came over on a boat.
Hmm.
Uh, they landed in Binondo. Of course, that's where most of the Chinoys landed. They first lived somewhere in near Central Market. I think that's in the Santa Cruz area, before trying a bit out of business further north in Nueva Ecija. That's my grandparents and my parents. I was not born yet, but I dug history over time, and then we ended up moving back to Quezon City, first Apo Street, then in the Scout area, where our ancestral home was, until it,
Mm.
of course, the age, time, it got demolished already. But that's how I trace it. That's how I trace my roots, rather.
And another thing too is, in looking, well, the thing that attracted me to your book, The Greatest Fight of Sunny Granada, initially was the cover. And I understand that your daughter did the cover. I don't have we'll post it when when we post everything, we'll have a copy of the image of the cover. But it's of a fighter who has hand wraps and boxing trunks, throwing a right hand and hitting what looks like a space alien. T Tell us about how. So it was your daughter that came up with that concept.
Yeah, yeah. My daughter's quite a talented artist, so she dabbles in it. It's not her main thing, but it's something she dabbles in it, and she's got talent. So I really like that cover. Yeah, I think she how do I say it, interpreted the story quite well. I gave her I gave her cues and pegs, but she did it quite well. And yeah, the greatest fight of Sunny Granada. I know it's a, as you say, speculative fiction. Yeah, it's a bit of a sci-fi story. It's definitely very far away from, as you say, the realism or the social realist type of stories that you favor. And the reason that I am into genre, well, I guess if I can go back to your initial question about me being a Chinoy, even though I am a Pinoy and that I have a Chinese background influence, I did grow up in Filipino, so I know the Filipino culture. I know about our Spanish heritage, that they were here for 300 years. I know about the history, the war, the Japanese occupation, the American occupation. I have said that because of the expansive influence of the West, I did grow up a lot on Western influences. So I was exposed, of course, to books, Americans, of English, people from the UK, people from Australia. And it reached a point where I skewed, or how do I say this? What appealed to me were the speculative fiction stories, or the genre fiction, excuse me, the genre fiction stories of the West. So my introduction to reading and to books was, not surprisingly, back in the 80s, through Greek myths, Norse myths. And from there, because of the wonder and imagination that came from reading those myths, I ended up reading anything and everything. So
Mm.
science fiction, fantasy, horror, mystery, suspense, everything in between. Crime, mystery, suspense. I think I mentioned that. So there, I read those, the detective stories. But most of those influences were Western. So I'll rattle off some Western authors that I grew up with. So of course, there's Tolkien, there's Lewis, there's Langle, there's Le Guin, there's Agatha Christie, there's Arthur Conan Doyle. As you can see, this is just a smattering of what I've read. It came to a point that I began to wonder, where are the genre stories written by those near me,
Yeah, yeah.
those who look like me, those who like me, what I'm familiar with. So I started looking for that, and I had a hard time finding it. I did find social realist stories about us, but genre, not so much. Please don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't like social realist stories. I love them too. I've got this. I've been quoted many times saying, "A story is a story is a story, whether you read or write it. What matters is how it's written and what it means and how it relates to a reader, how it appeals to a reader." So, so, as much as I like, I am identified with genre. I really, as a reader or as a writer, I really don't differentiate. That story is a story is a story, as I say. But anyway, I looked for the genre stories of fellow Filipinos, couldn't find them. So I set up, back then, pre-internet, a digest. It's called the Digest of Philippine Genre Stories. I just, pure chutzpah, I just sent out a call for submissions and got some, published them, and I enjoyed it. I seek and ye shall find. So I
Yeah.
got what I was looking for. Working together with me, I mean, well, not coincidentally, at the same time that I was pushing this, friends in were also, there were other people who eventually became my friends were pushing the same, so that I can rattle off some. Dean Alfar, of course, Miate Yvette Tan, I met many others, and they became my friends, and they became known for pushing speculative fiction. And I feel all the richer for having it, all the luckier for having finally found genre stories by Filipinos.
You know, one of the things that really stands out in spec fiction, at least the stories that I've read and in the stories that I've been able to read in your collections, is world building. You know, how setting
Mm.
is such an important part of that. Can you, maybe talk about your approach to setting and how you go about building those worlds?
A good question. For a short story, as you know, you've got a limited word count to work with to make it work within a short story. The longest you can go maybe is a novella, but novelette maybe up to 10,000. So you got to be careful, I guess. You got to know right away your setting right from the start. I would expect it's easier in realism because you live it, you're living in that setting, but the extra effort you have to put in to thinking about, to imagine, excuse me, I think, to imagine how it would look like if you give them, for example, advanced, such as in Sunny Granada. What would a mixed martial arts among various intergalactic species be like, and how would that affect not just the tournament but the people? So that's in relation to Sunny Granada. I had to really give that a lot of thought. You have to take into account all the aspects such as travel, how do you make it realistic, the interaction between different, not just species but cultures of the species. So you have to think about that. How would they communicate? So it is a challenge. You have to take it a step further. You have to think of all these little details. Having said that, it's easier because, like I said, it's a shorter form. These are short fiction collections. Imagine a novel. Say again, let's take one of the novels I grew up with, Dune by Frank Herbert. I'm sure Mr. Herbert must have spent hours thinking up the setting around Arrakis, and all that he wanted to say about it before he could put it through, before he could finally get his story out there. So my answer is, it is a difficult process. You have to think of all the elements that could go into that story that might affect it. You have to be wary of what might work, might not work, because it might affect the story negatively. And then roll the dice and hope you can write something that the reader will find appealing.
That story about Sonny Granada, this intergalactic kind of UFC, Ultimate Fighting intergalactic fighting championship. It's a male-centered story, yet it kind of transcends place because you're going from one place and you're going back to the Philippines and you're traveling in the memory. Can you, I guess, maybe speak to that because it's a very masculine type story, but there's a tenderness and a vulnerability and even an innocence in that. How do you negotiate those things? Because it seems like, you're really trying to get at you're trying to get at the heart. You're trying to get at something that's, you know, not
Yeah.
so much beating over the head,
Yeah, well, when I was writing that, I think I wrote that as a there was a call for submissions by Dean Alfar in his Philippine Spectic anthology years ago, and that was my submission. I was by chance the TV was on and there was a UFC match on, and I was thinking, how do I make this work? How do I make it? And I was it was in my mind at that time that I wanted to write a sci-fi story. So I thought, what if they were aliens? So that was the very basic. But as for the tenderness part, I did want to pay an homage to a grandfather grandson relationship. I was thinking there have been so many cases of broken families here in the Philippines, not broken up because of, let's say, adultery or infidelity, but broken up because of the way that many Filipino families have to subsist on OFW remittances, which means the father and mother have to leave their families behind, work abroad, and just send money back. They only visit maybe once a year if they're lucky,
Yeah.
and the grandparents are left behind to take care of the kids. So I just thought, what if my fighter was the son of such a case, of such parents that they had to go abroad to work and send money back, and the grandfather had to take care of him. And what if, further, I thought, what if the parents had, died after working on another planet, or in this case, of course, another planet? And then I went from there. And then somehow or other, I tied it to the other cultural elements of the Philippines, most specifically basketball. Strong reference to basketball, especially the PBA of the 70s and 80s there, and the famous players then. I wanted to tie it to that, the love of basketball, because as you know, the three biggest, actually, no, they say now there are four biggest sports in the Philippines among Pinoys would be basketball, boxing, and billiards. And then it used to be bowling, but of course, bowling is now kind of less popular now. So maybe it's the big three. So
Hmm.
those three: billiards, boxing, and basketball. I just wanted to tie boxing to that. Maybe one day I'll write something that's tied to billiards.
Well, it's interesting because, in those sports, you have to have foresight, you have to, you know, have a sense of nuance, a sense of being able to kind of see out of both sides of your head. That I really liked that part of the story with the grandfather, watching old VHS videos of the basketball players of the past. But in a way, I guess Sonny himself is kind of an OFW himself, having to fight these fights in other worlds. And then, maybe that, metaphorically at least addresses the fact that you have people that are constantly traveling, right, that are leaving their home and going to another home, and they're caught between two worlds. So Sonny might be caught between, the world
I,
of his
I
grandfather and the world of the past, and and the world that can come crashing down if he, makes one bad move.
I agree. It is. It seems to be that that is where we're going. Many in Philippine society has to move, so maybe that's why I made Sunny be also a traveler. I mean, he had. I think if you remember, there was a part where he's talking to his best friend,
Hmm.
and he's nothing for you here. You gotta
Yeah.
go. You
Yeah.
gotta. If you want to move, you gotta go somewhere else. Or if you're gonna stay here, you're gonna have to reinvent yourself as something else if you want to move up or be find something better. And I guess that's something that many Filipinos have to face. That they realize that I gotta go somewhere else if I want to find something better. It's a pretty sad situation, and it's kind of reflected in that. And I guess Sonny is one of the luckier ones. He found it, and he found success in the tough in TUF, the Universal Fighting
I mean, the
Championships. So
story was very funny. I mean, I liked the humor in it, but I also liked the storyline, and the part with the grandfather too, of how, he was named after Sonny was named after the dirtiest player in the Philippine Basketball League. But, I guess when he was born, I guess the person at the hospital misspelled the name. Instead of Sonny, ended
yeah,
up spelling it Sunn. And I guess they say the rest is kind of like history. There was another story. I think it was from, let's see, Mouths to Speak, Voices to Sing, which is a great title. I don't offhand remember it, but it was about a woman who had suffered a lot of losses in her life, and she just shrunk into the size of a bird and ended up in the cage. And with some of the stories, because I just regrettably been so busy, I didn't get a chance to read every story in the collection, but I know that in the stories that I have read that a lot of there are a lot of themes, powerful themes that you're addressing in these stories. What messages really for you stand out that you try to convey in your work?
That's a deep question. But well, for the one that you just referenced, that's Lost for Words. It won the fantasy magazine's flash fiction contests. I can't remember the year in the 2010s. I'm grateful for that. That was one of my earliest successes, an online win, first place win during the Halloween contest of Fantasy Magazine. That's a story really about depression. I was wondering myself if I could still be a writer the way I wrote it, and I was questioning if I really could really put sentences, paragraphs, chapters together to write stories, short stories, or even novels, and that makes sense that we're telling. So I was looking at it, what if I wasn't? And I just came up with that character of a woman who was, but who just decided to lose it because she lost everything in her life. So that maybe that's a symbol or metaphor, and it led to her demise. I mean, it just ended up with her getting, well, at least in the story, pecked, because it
Mm.
shrunk her to nothing. It shrunk her to nothing. Even if she wasn't pecked by the bird in the story, I would have just made her shrink away to nothing. So yeah, it's a story about depression. It's really sad, and it that's actually one of the more what negative or sad stories in my collection. I have been told, and I wasn't aware of this, I have been told by a number of my readers that they do find strangely, strangely to me, hope in my stories. That there's a theme that there's always a silver lining somewhere, even in the darkest moments. And I was thinking about it. And I said, "Oh, gee, that's kind of tough." I was trying to think. There are some that I wrote that were pretty sad, and I remember being pretty down when I was writing it, and they still found some kind of hope in it. I doubt if it was Lost for Words or some of the others, but they pointed out to, well, like Sunny Granada. They pointed out Mouths to Speak, Voices to Sing, the title story of my Penguin Random House book. They pointed it out in House 1.0, also from Mouths to Speak and Exit Plan. So maybe there is. Maybe it's just me trying to look for that silver lining myself and injecting it into the stories, having written some, what for me were pretty depressing ones, like Lost for Words.
Well, there's a phrase that you've used in this interview that I think kind of connects with that, and you've referred to this thing of what if, what if,
Mm,
what if, and I think
yeah.
that leads into possibility. It's like, what if somebody were to read this and see themselves in it? And, like in A Lost for Words, right? They step back and like, hey, wait a minute, let me back up. This is what happens, right? And well, how do I deal with it, right? And even though, she has shrunk, has the song really disappeared? Because as the reader, we hold the song that maybe she has lost, perhaps. I don't know.
That's a good insight. Yeah, Tony. That's if that's your personal insight, that's pretty good, and that I'm learning from you as much as anyone, because I'm glad you're telling me this. At least these are insights that can help me craft, I hope, better stuff in the future.
Well, also too, there was another story about these two friends that were very close. They were basketball teammates, and they were
Ah, yeah.
caught in this kind of political situation where the father of one of the players was a radio announcer, and he, was one of these guys that was kind of a crusader for the people, right? And he rubbed some people the wrong way. And I think your use of metaphor in terms of basketball and how really, life is kind of like a game and you have to be able to play it well and to have
Yeah.
foresight. And sometimes you have to do some things that aren't obvious. Can you talk about that? Because, the use of that, in fact, we have a guy, I don't know if you've heard of Randy Rebai. He's a writer, a Phil Am writer from Michigan. He wrote a book called Patron Saints of Nothing, and it was about the Duterte government. I think it won the American Book Award or something. It was shortlisted. But he had a YA novel about basketball as well. But I guess it
Hmm.
was centered here in the U.S. Randy Rebai is his name. But can you talk about that? Because I really enjoyed that story because there was some complexity and a lot of deep layers.
Well, I'll look up Mr. Rebai's books. I'll try to get that. So thank you for the tip. But as for that story, that was blending in. That's in the greatest fight of Sunny Granada and other stories. I remember writing that during the pandemic in both anger and sadness because I was just so fed up with the stories of corruption that's enveloping the whole Philippines, right? And how the regular folk, the simple people, just couldn't find a way out of it, right? We couldn't find our solution. I call it that's still a genre story in my opinion. The way I categorized it in my head, it's young adult crime, young adult suspense, but mostly crime because it deals so heavily with the corruption that we face every day. It talks about government contracts being substandard and the politicians pocketing money that they set themselves up as the authorities who are elite at the expense of the regular folk. Maybe I was thinking about that. Maybe blending in that story, despite all the conflict, tragedy, hardship that I wrote into it. I tried to find a way, no matter how small, to show that there are ways to find justice still. And that way, I think since this is one of the stories that you finish, I can say it that this is the one where it may not have been through the conventional way that the criminals were caught, like brought to jail, brought to trial, brought to arrested, brought to trial, brought to jail, but rather through other means that they were shamed and some semblance of justice was found. In my discussions with a Filipino crime writer FH, who's a good friend, I speak about it. What sets crime stories, whether it's YA crime or adult crime, apart as a genre here in the Philippines versus the West? It's really that in the West there is the presumption that the system will deliver justice. The system will work. That the perpetrators will be caught, or at least will be investigated through proper forensics and proper detective work, and then brought to trial, judged by their peers, and given justice. In the Philippines, that does not happen. The story is that the justice won't come, but it has to be found through other means.
Mm, mm.
If at all, if at all. So that was the discussion of the dialogue I had with FH Batakan. And I think that's what's reflected in blending in. Having said that, I did get a lot of heartwarming and validating reviews from reviewers that they really liked it. Though of course they felt traumatized by it. I'm sorry about that, but I was as traumatized as they are, maybe more so because I wrote it. But yeah, I guess that's what the story tried to reflect, that the justice won't come through conventional means, if at all. It has to be found through other means. And maybe I just Blendin's way was just a way to show that there is hope to find that still, if one is clever enough to, to seek it out.
I liked the relationship between the young brother who looked up to his star basketball playing older brother and how, the brother was a mentor, but there was a deeper message there that, you can't, you have to use your wits, you have to be smart, you have to use your mind like a basketball player does. You have to kind of play like maybe two steps ahead or three steps ahead, kind of like a billiard player, right? So
Yeah,
something tells me that, given those conditions, maybe that maybe that does something to the Filipino character, makes us or makes Filipinos react and act in certain ways that you think they're doing one thing and maybe there's another intent. This cleverness, this I don't want to
yeah.
say underhanded thing, but just maybe a sleight of hand in order to get to where you want to go.
I know what you're referring to. I think in here we call it in Tagalog either wais, trying to be wise, or wais, clever,
Right.
as you say, or as they say, discarte. Discarte. Discarte means you find a way with through your wits You find some way that can be both positive and negative, because discarte and wise also can be done or can be interpreted as you have a set of rules that is good for everybody, right? Like such as traffic laws, for example, and through discarte and wise, you subvert those traffic laws and get around. So it can be negative. However, I wrote that story in such a way so that I can imply strongly, as strongly as I could, that wise and discarte can be used also to get the proper justice for the wrongs that are being done to the Filipino people. That from our corrupt from the corrupt government officials. That's the way I wanted to do it. That maybe wais and discarte, or that wit, that cleverness, can be used to help us improve our situation. So I tried to twist it around and make it a positive thing.
For somebody that grew up in the US, whose, relatives is Lola and Lola, came here in the 1920s, right? We lost a lot of our language. But when you said Descarte, I did recognize that because we have a music group down here. They're called Descarte Namin. So when you said
Hmm.
Descarte, it kind of rang a bell.
Yeah,
I wanted you to maybe address this one as well. There's been a blossoming of Filipino writing in the diaspora, not only in the US and Canada, but in Australia. You have Filipinos in Europe writing about all kinds of topics from OFWs to, what it's like growing up in the States, not having grown up speaking Cebuano or Waray or whatever, or Tagalog or whatever, right? What and for the not to be corny about it, but what, if any, is a common bond that binds us and makes us unique as Filipino writers, regardless of where we happen to be in the geography.
that's a tough question. I wonder. Like I said, identify as Chinoy, so I know my even my own background is kind of messy. It's not pure, but who is anyway? Who is
Yeah,
pure?
right, right.
Yeah. What's the common bond? I'd like to think maybe we I don't know why. There's so many reasons to be unhappy, but they call us they call the Filipinos, despite all the troubles the Philippines has, we consistently rank in the top five happiest people, in whatever whoever's doing these
Oh,
rankings
I saw
for
that.
happiness,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe ever we write, no matter how sad, there is this sense of, maybe like you said, corny. It's kind of corny hope, or we do look on the bright side of things, or we find something to laugh at. At least I do. I mean, I love jokes, I love puns, so I try to laugh at everything because I think life's absurd anyway. So it's worth a good laugh. So maybe
Yeah,
that is something that the Pinoy, no matter where they are, carry with them. If you're exposed, or lived in that culture long enough, you will find something to laugh at,
yeah,
no matter how tough or absurd it is. We are the most emotional. That one I can say for sure. We are the most emotional country in Asia. I know we've ranked that. Whoever's doing these rankings, it makes sense. We're more akin. Our emotions are more akin to the Latin American countries. Maybe that's the Spanish influence. I'm not sure. So maybe that emotion of happiness eventually comes out. On the corollary side, it does also show that we do get affected by negative stuff also the most. So we see these dramas of crying people, and crying families, especially during tragedies. But eventually, they somehow, I'd like to think that it twists around and we ended up laughing, even if it's a laugh of despair, a laugh of resignation. We're still laughing. So maybe that's something that binds us together.
I
I'd like to
guess
see I'd like to see that turn into a positive, that we're laughing to lift ourselves up too.
maybe
Sorry,
it's
go
a
ahead.
maybe it's a combination of stoicism and laughter. Where you just,
Good.
it's interesting because we are in Black History Month here in the U.S. Every February is Black History Month, and the writer James Baldwin had an essay that he wrote called "Uses of the Blues" and how Black folk had survived over the centuries. And it was kind of like, when you go back to the old blues, it's like, hey, okay, there's a big flood coming, and it's going to be bad, but hey, well, what can you do? You gotta deal with it, and you gotta. So I think there's connections there on the human side.
Yeah, I haven't read that. I'm gonna look it up. I like Mr. Baldwin. I've read some of his books, but yes, that I think there is that connection. I agree.
the uses of the blues. Like, hey, well, you gotta get up. We gotta, it's kind of like we gotta push onward and to deal with it. Being a speculative fiction writer, or just being a writer and a human being yourself, you mentioned what if. Well, let me pose a couple of what ifs to you. Okay, what if Kenneth Yu had not been a writer? Then what? What would what would have happened?
Oh, geez, I don't know. What if I wasn't a writer? Well, in my day job right now, I'm a marketer.
Hmm.
Maybe I'd be a marketer. Maybe my mother was a doctor. I might have been a doctor if I had not been following this path. I might be. She might have wanted me to be a doctor. I mean that is a possibility. Okay. I love tennis as much as I love writing. Though I'm not exactly the most athletic or strongest guy. I would have loved to at least have tried to be a tennis pro.
Oh, no kidding, really? You know,
Bro,
there's
yeah,
there's this
battling.
guy, there's this guy that I saw that was just completely off the chain, this guy named Sinner. I had
Yeah,
never
yeah.
seen a guy play like that in my life. And then there's another guy from Spain, I forget the young guy. He's really
Alcaraz.
good too. Pardon me?
Yeah, Alcaraz is. I think that's Carlos Alcaraz you're talking
Alcaraz,
about.
yeah. See, when I was coming up, I kind of liked tennis too, but I guess in my time or era, that was Jimmy Connors, Bjorn Borg, Roscoe
Same with
Tanner, and
same.
and guys like that, right? I love Bjorn Borg. I mean, even though he did play with a wooden racket, I just really liked that guy's style all the way up to his headband. It was just something about that guy. And who was the other guy? There was another guy that was kind of like Borg. No, it was another guy. He looked like Borg, but he was kind of like Diet Borg. I forget. You know the guy. I mean, you know him, right? He has the headband. What's
Vitas Gerulaitis.
Vitas
No.
Gerulaitis? Yeah, Vitas. And then there was Ili
Yeah.
Nastasi. You remember who was always? I think he was.
Yeah.
Nastasi was McEnroe before McEnroe.
Yeah, he was the bad boy. And then there was Guillermo Vilas. Yeah, yeah. I know that era. I've been watching since that time. So you and I have a connection. And I grew up, like I said, I love tennis as much as I love writing and reading. So yeah, in your what if, I would have loved to be in the tennis world somehow. So I went through the Beckers, Lendls, Wielanders after Borg and McEnroe era. Then the Sampras, Agassi, Courier, Chang, and then the Krajceks, the Ivanisevic. Sorry, I could just rattle it off. Hewitt until the golden era of the big three: Nadal, Federer, Djokovic. Yeah, Murray too, big four maybe. And then now, as you say, Sinner and Alcaraz.
When I was a kid, my grandmother actually took me to a tennis match in the Bay Area. I saw Arthur Ashe.
Oh wow. Okay,
Yeah,
then good for you.
yeah, I saw him. It was I think the Bank of the West Open. And let's see, I think the first game that I kind of really got into, this was like maybe in 1979. I think it was Forest Hills. It was Connors versus this guy named Guillermo Vilas.
Yeah, Guillermo Vilas from Argentina. I can't remember, but he's from the Latin American
I mean, he
countries. Yeah,
and
yeah,
he didn't play a power game. It was all finesse, but Connors couldn't do anything with the guy. I think Vilas, I think won, he won. He won that.
yeah.
Yeah.
There was a year Vilas was just unstoppable. There was one year he was just unstoppable. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So again, this is Kenneth Yu. Last name is spelled Y-U. He's the author of two books, first of which is Mouths to Speak, Voices to Sing, which was published by Penguin Random House in 2024, and his latest, The Greatest Fight of Sunny Granada and Other Stories, published by Anvil Press in the Philippines, published in 2025. I got to say, the stories that I've read were captivating. I love quirky. They quirky, but at the same time address some very powerful themes of community and just being human. Where these stories might be fantastical, but they always come back to the heart. For those that are trying to get their stories out there and published and trying to get their voice out there. Do you have any perhaps any advice for some of the younger writers?
Oh, yeah. I always tell when I'm honored enough or lucky enough to get invited to speak, especially to young people who are interested to tell stories, never stop reading. Keep on reading, no matter read both within your comfort zone and outside.
Mm,
Don't let anyone shame you for what you're reading and tell you that this should be what you read and this not. But in return, read widely. Read from anyone in the world. Don't just stick to one country or one region. Read in any language if you can, if you know another language, because there are nuances in other languages that you can pick up from. Read men, women, and anyone who, whatever their gender identity is, because that gives you a different perspective. Read from all races if you can. Read from the perspective of different religions. It can only expand your mind. And I guarantee you, by reading such, you will become a better writer. Because, in my opinion, no writer worth his salt does not read. Writer will always be a good reader.
Fantastic. That's really great advice. And thank you so much. Again, this is Kenneth Yu, wonderful, wonderful author who's graciously given of his time to spend with us from Metro Manila. And for those that want to learn more about you and your work and pick up your books, is there a website or a place that they can go to?
I don't have a website yet, but my Instagram is there. I think it's Kenneth_U86, where I post mostly about my work, my writing work and my writing life. I do have a Facebook, but it's more a personal one. But yeah, I occasionally post publicly. You can look for me there, Kenneth.U.31, I think. But my books are my profile image there. So that's where I am. Yeah, I've been told that maybe I should set up a website. Maybe I'll get around to it one day. But in the meantime, if you want to read Filipino works, you can check my website out. Not about me, but about other Filipinos and their genre stories. PhilippineGenreStories.com. That if you want to read about what Filipinos are producing now in the genre field, that's where you can go.
And what was the website on that again?
PhilippineGenreStories.com. I can write it in the chat.
PhilippineGenreStories.com. Again, PhilippineGenreStories.com. Kenneth, it goes to show, your kind-heartedness, that, you literary citizen, that, you want to not only promote your own work, but the work of the community of fellow writers, that they get an opportunity to have their voices heard. And that's something that comes back to you. That's something that, you give and then you receive. But oftentimes, not even with the intent of receiving. It's just, wanting to help, man. Just being a person, man. I get it. It's wonderful, and that's the heart of our folks, the heart of being human, the heart of being Filipino, I guess. Pinoy, Chinoy, or what they call in San Francisco. We have like all the mixtures. We have like Mexipinos, like people that are half Mexican, half Filipino. We have Blackapinas, right? People that are half black, half Filipino, half African American. Italo-Pino. I got a whole section of my family. They're half Italian. So. A diaspora all over the kitchen, man, throughout the galaxies, But anyway, Kenneth, thank you so much for being with us and spending time with Listen and Be Heard Radio for readers and writers. Again, Kenneth Yu, the author of two wonderful books, Mouths to Speak, Voices to Sing, 2024, published by Penguin Random House, Southeast Asia, and The Greatest Fight of Sunny Granada and Other Stories, 2025, published by Anvil Publications in the Philippines. Thank you so much, Kenneth, for being with us. And again, this is Listen and Be Heard Radio for readers and writers, and we're going to toss it back to Martha in the studio. I hope these questions